Hey guys, in today's video we're going to be taking a tour on how to inspect and test out and program the Vortec series of vehicle control modules, whether it be the 96 to 97 series or the 98 and up series. So if that's what you need to do, stay tuned. We're going to get right into it. All right, let's talk about where you can find these vehicle control modules. So this is on a CK truck. The vehicle control module is going to be located right here near the driver's side fender, right adjacent to the fuse and relay box. If you're trying to find it on a G van, you're going to find it still on the driver's side, sitting down here, and there's your fuse and relay box here. Right here's your fender here. You may have hoses and piping from the brake system in the way here obscuring it, but that's where it sits. In a G van, if you're looking at it in like an M or an L type van, like an Astro or a Safari, it's going to be sitting in a vertical position instead of horizontal, right behind the battery. So this is the battery here, and you'll find it sitting right there. The same vehicle control module that we're going to go over today is used on all these different vehicles. If you're talking about an S or T type truck, like an S10, it's going to be sitting, here's the right-hand side fender facing the forward part of the vehicle. You should find it sitting right here. So this same kind of VCM is used on all these vehicles. And the two of them that we're going to be showing today, I'm going to be showing, this is one from a 98 vehicle, and its service number is 162-50279, and then it has an identification number of 162-58835. And I'm also going to be showing a 96 one. Very similar design, just kind of different number here. This one's going to be a service number 162-08546. And then it's got another identification number down here of 161-65180. So they look very similar. If I back out here just a second, they look very similar in terms of very heavy construction. These first generation ones are pretty weighty. And then having the connections on this side, and it's pretty common at this stage to have the paint peeling on these. So when you go pull one of these at the salvage yard, cosmetically, you can't really be concerned with that. These 96 and 97 ones, you've got a cavity that's embossed on the top here with black. And you got another one embossed with white usually. Might say gray, but white is what I've usually seen, and there's one here. And then on the 96 and 97s only, you've got this fifth connector right here. And then on the bottom, you've got another connector here and here. And if we flip this guy over, we'll see that that one is characterized as a red and a blue. And then you've also got this cover held on with a couple of Torx bolts. And inside here is a calibration module for the knock sensor. Now we look at the 98, it looks identical. If you don't take a close look at it, it looks identical, but I'm going to show you there's one key cosmetic difference, right? So you still have the white, you still have the black here. On the bottom, you still have the blue and the red. You still have the knock sensor, knock module calibration module that's in here. And then the difference mostly is now, instead of having that fifth cavity, there's just this kind of round shape in the casting. There's nothing it plugs in here. So that's the key difference between the two of these. Now, in order to get it off, I'm going to show you just, there's usually a little spring kind of clip that holds it on this side. And then on this side, there's usually a couple of, tabs that it latches into. I'll try to link up over here on the top here, maybe a little view of what that looks like extracting it. The other thing you'll encounter are these little retaining clips, and these retaining clips you can pop off pretty easily with a screwdriver. You just want to kind of lift up here on the top part here and just pull it off. This is what the 98 and up ones look like. On the 96 and 97s, you'll probably see this kind of red one. It's a little shorter, but it's the same deal. It just doesn't have the little piece that you can grab with your finger at the other end here. So again, you just kind of lift up and get it to latch up there. Maybe do it like this so I don't block your view, and it just comes right off. And then what I found easiest to get these off, these guys, these clips, these retainers on the connectors really latch on tight. This is a real waterproof design. This is actually a very rugged module. So what I find is you hold this guy down, And let me see if I can get a closer look at that. You hold this guy down, and then I like to take like a very wide flat blade screwdriver, and you kind of just push it out like that, right? And so when they talk about the colors and what they mean, and so this one has like a unique type of retainer. The other three are going to be more of this style. Again, you just kind of push it down, and you can take a flat bladed screwdriver, a wide one like this, and just gently help pull it out for yourself. When they talk about the colors, you can see how the plastic in this white one is kind of white, maybe even clear, natural, different colors you might use for this. And over here, the black one is kind of like a smoke, a dark gray. And very similarly, if you look on the bottom, like here's this red one, the connector for the red one will be red. So, you know, you can't mix them up. And similarly, the blue one will be blue. I'll show that one in a minute. And then, you know, you can't mix up where they go. Even though they might, these three here might all fit the same, they have these different colors. The one that we talked about on the 96 that's different, where it has this centerpiece here, this C5 connector, this is not really anything that, if I can find out what I did with it, I know I had one of these to show you guys. What this is just a loop back kind of connector, and it doesn't actually, here it is. It actually looks like this, right? And all it is these two connections here are tied at the end. Now, I actually cut this off at the salvage yard before I realized that, but if you peel back the harness about, I guess, 8, 9, maybe 10 inches or so, you'll find that it's factory just looped together, these two connections. And this guy's just kind of like a standard one, right? He goes in here, he grabs at the top, and to get him off, you can just lift up the top and wiggle him loose, right? That's all it is to that. And again, that's not used on the design of the VCM, excuse me, in 98, right? There's no connection for anything to plug in here. All right, so that's where you find them. That's how you disconnect, that's how you get them unlatched, and that's how you disconnect the cables from the wiring harness, and that's the differences. I'm going to show you now a harness that you can put together that I've done to program these on the bench, which is right here. And here you can see an example of that blue connector I was talking about earlier. We only need the blue for the 96 and 97. What's common between all of them are the connections that we'll do on the black and the white side. And then we've got a DLC connector for our scan tool to fit in there. And then we've got a switch so that we can simulate turning the ignition key into the on position for some of the different steps of tests that we'll be doing. And then we just got all the grounds and powers that we're going to be using tied together. We've got our ignitions tied together and hooked up to the switch here. And then, of course, we've got what we need for the communications line tied together and then connected to the DLC itself. So let me show you now what that looks like in the wiring diagram. So I'm going to kind of move this stuff out of the way here. And again, this paint that peels off these things, it's just crumbles apart very, very, very easily, and it gets everywhere, let me tell you. All right, so what we're going to take a look here is what we did on the DLC. See if we can blow this up just a little bit. There we go. So this is the diagnostic or data link connector. Sometimes it's called a diagnostic link connector. We're going to want pin 2 of that and the purple wire for our Class B serial data, also called Class 2. We're going to want both pin 4 and 5, which are the grounds, particularly the VCM ground, but also the ground we need for the Tech2, black and a black and white. And then we're going to want pin 16, which is an orange battery power line. So with those connected, we'll have what we need for the diagnostic link connector. And then we take a look at the various connectors, the components. This is the blue one called Cavity 1. And what we want only for 96, wherever I've got like a pencil circling something here, it's talking about what's different between 96 and 97 and 98 and up, which makes why this is why these VCMs are not interchangeable. So pin 4 doesn't exist as an ignition feed in 98 and up, but it does in 96. So we took this in because we need it for the 96 one. That's the only connection on the blue that we actually need. So anything in yellow is something you need to do this harness I was just showing. But just kind of going through here and just showing you, right? So pin 5 and pin 9 and pin 12, these are all unique things, or different things rather, than how they're wired up for 98. And just, you know, continuing to go through these connectors, this is still cavity 1, the blue one. Pin 18 is different from 96 and 98, and the rest are in common. So you see there's enough differences to make them incompatible. But the only thing we would need for our bench harness for a 96 and 97 only is pin 4, so we have an ignition feed. The next one I'll show you here is cavity 2, which is the red connector. And again, wherever it's circled, it's just highlighting things that are different. Like, so for example, pin 2 is not used on this 96. But if I was to look at a 98, I would find that it is used. And I'll show you that here. I think I have that real handy just to show one example comparison. You know, we've got the actual service manual for 98. And if we take a look at that connector that we're interested in right there, C2. Just kind of compare these two. So we were looking at here that on the red connector C2, that pin 2 is marked as not used in 96, and we marked it as a difference because we circled it. And if we take a look at C2 for 98, we can see that it's actually the canister vent solenoid. So it's actually used in 98 and up, even though it wasn't used over here. Very similarly, we see pin 3 is used in 96 and 97 as an injector number 1 control line, but we can see pin 3 in 98 and up is not used at all. And the rest of these, like the second to third shift solenoid and the first to second shift solenoid, right, we can see these are in common, so they're not circled. Just continuing on with this then, I'm just showing you on this red connector. We don't need any of this for the bench harness, but just showing you all these differences, right? So pin 8's different, 9's different. We continue going through it. We can see that pin 25 is different, and the service manual doesn't even show it, but there's supposed to be a pin 29 here, right? So there's just enough differences to make them incompatible. Another big difference is in 96, the ABS brake system. The VCM had a role with the ABS brake system, so another difference, and we'll see that when we get over to the programming step. Here's connector C3. They're calling it gray, and that would be, you know, the one we talked about, this white. It might be referred to as gray in some cases. We've got pin 1 and 2 are different for 96. Pin 13 and 14 are different for 96 and 97 from compared to 98 and up. And then we take a look at the ones we're really interested in for the programming. So we've got pin 15 is different, but what we care about is the same. 17 and 18 are common to all of them. So these are both the ground lines. And pin 21, battery feed, common to all of them. And then again, pin 30 is different between 96, 97, and 98. And then again, with the ones we care about, looking at the black C4 one, cavity 4. 7's different between the two, and I'm just showing you the differences just so you can note it as to why you can't interchange these VCMs. So you cannot take a 98 VCM and use it as is on a 96 vehicle or vice versa. But 11's common, and we want that purple wire for our serial data. 12's different, but 13's common, brown, ignition feed, we need that. A couple other ones that are different. 18's a pink ignition feed. We want that, common to all of them, 96 and up. Anything in yellow is common to 96 and up that we need if it's not circled. Again, if it's got a circle like we did at the beginning with that first ignition feed, it was different. And then, of course, 20 is different. And then if we take a look at the last page, you know, there's no differences, but we don't need any of these. So with that wiring, we can get something that allows us to power this up on the bench and allows us to hook up a scan tool and check this out. So I'm first going to take a look at this one from 96, this guy here. And we're going to go reference that by the service number. So I'm going to take a look at this 16208-546 model. And we're going to hook this up and do a test on the bench. Now, just like any other salvage yard module, powertrain control module, engine control module, in this case a vehicle control module, cosmetically, I mentioned, you know, don't be concerned about peeling paint and that sort of thing. What you really are concerned about is checking out these pins and making sure that in all of these cavities, as you remove these connectors, that everything looks pristine and intact. You don't want to have any problems with corrosion. You don't want to have any problems with bent or missing pins. If you do, don't purchase that one. Go look for a different vehicle to find something that's got a higher probability of checking out okay, like we're going to do now. The other thing I would point out here before we get started actually hooking it up is when you take a look at some of the documentation in the service manual, one of the things that they talk about that's common for all of these years, they talk about that if you purchase a replacement that's a new VCM, right? If you purchase a replacement that's a new VCM, so they get into here about vehicle control module replacement and programming, things that you're going to have to do after you change it. For example, you're going to have to do a pass lock programming procedure for the security. You're going to have to do a system variation relearn on the crankshaft position sensor. Otherwise, you're going to get a code for that. But one of the things I'm calling out here in particular is that you're going to have to do that's kind of unique, and it's a carryover because this is a first generation system coming over as the first flash programmable control module for the engine and transmission, is you've got to actually open up this cover and transfer this calibration prom to your new vehicle control module. Now, you think about something that's flash programmable, you wouldn't actually expect to have to do something like that. But if we take a look at this guy, and this is common to all of them, whether it's 96 or not, you got a couple of, let's see what size this is. This is a T20. You got a couple of T20 screws, bolts, whatever you want to call them, holding this guy. They're going to be super tight when you remove them off of here. You take these two off, and then you'll be able to get this cover off. And this cover might not, readily come off. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You might have to give it a little wrap with a plastic mallet or something to get it to let go after so many years. But inside is this calibration module for the knock sensor. And to transfer it from your used one to your new one, just like it says on here, you push in these two clips and it lets go. Now, imagine what's inside this. I haven't actually tore one of these apart, but I imagine what's inside of here is some type of a ROM chip, like a PROM, like in the 95 and earlier era. And when you get the new one, there won't be anything in here, and you'll have to transfer this from the used one that you're replacing. You have to pop this guy back in and reattach this. And at that point, you'll be ready to proceed with the programming step. If you're doing a salvage yard PCM, you're already going to have one of these calibration modules, and you don't have to do this step. But a new one, at least what the service manual claims, I have not actually tried to purchase one of these new, so I'm going by what GM says in their manual. But what they're alleging is when you buy one of these brand new, it doesn't have that, and so this is the transfer procedure that you'd have to do before you can proceed with doing the replacement and the programming. Anyway, so thought that would be a good tip to show. Just get these snugged back down. They don't give a torque value for them. Just keep it nice and snug so that the gasket keeps a watertight seal. What's actually interesting is when you look at these, they tend to look really nice on the bottom. I mean, they might be dirty, but you don't really typically see. Let me see if I can back this out. Yeah, camera's as close as it's going to get. You don't really see a lot of the peeling paint problem on the bottom like you do on the top. It's just interesting how when it's exposed on the bottom area, you'd probably see the same thing, but you don't ever get any water trapped in this. The kind of retainer this sits in, the bracket, it just doesn't let water accumulate, so this stays rather pristine. All right, so let's get set up to hook this up. And one of the things I'm going to point out as well, I got another tip for you here. I think I can find this. Yeah, here, I printed this out. So we talked about this fifth connector that was unique on these 96s. And I wanted to show you, you can't find this in the service manual from GM. But if you do a third-party service subscription and you can print out schematics, like you would use if you were a professional shop and you were trying to find an electrical problem, they actually call this guy out. So they talk about cavity 5. And they talk about this being a service circuit power connector and just showing that loop back that I was mentioning. So I don't know if this is some vestigial thing that was on there when maybe it's sometime before ODB2 came out. Maybe GM was thinking you'd have to plug something in to program these. I don't know. It's all pure speculation, but it completely serves no purpose. It's just a loopback, and it was phased out when they got to the 98 and up designs. Okay, so one other thing to call out. Unique to this particular vehicle control module, this particular number. This particular number was only used for a very short time in 96 because it's got a wiring defect. And if you had this, there was a technical service bulletin that GM put out and that talked about the fact that you need to install a wiring patch kit, and they called that part number 121-67310. And that revises the wiring harness at the VCM connector. This was corrected in manufacturing in February 14th of 96. So vehicles made prior to this date that have the part number I showed on the VCM need this applied. The revised part number for 96 and 97 was service number 162-44210. I'll put a link in the description. You can find these wiring kits on eBay. It's just a jumper wire. The procedure that you ended up doing is you would go into the blue connector and you would move the wire located at connector J3 in the white. They also, white/gray/clear. There's a lot of things they refer to that one. You'd remove pin 18, and then you'd move it over from and I just noticed these guys are using J here instead of C, so you have to be careful. GM is not even consistent between the service manual and these bulletins on what cavities they're talking about, so you follow along with the colors here. But you're basically going to take pin 18's wire from this white connection, and then you're going to move it to the blue pin 23. You're just going to take that apart and move it. And then you're going to install the jumper wire that's included with this kit that I mentioned up here, this kit right here, part number 7310, 1216-7310. You're going to install that jumper wire they provide between the red connections pin 26 and the white connections pin 18 that you just took out. So it's going to basically have a jumper there. And there's supposed to be a little tag that comes with that kit that you wrap onto the wiring harness to let service folks know that you've made these two changes. But that's all it is, right? You install a jumper wire from pin 26 to the now empty pin 18 from red to the white, and then you would have depopulated pin 18 on that connector and repopulated it into pin 23 of the blue connector. Now when you look at these connectors, if you're going to do something like that, you're going to need to have a screwdriver handy, but you look at these connectors, and on the back of them, you can see there are these little tabs. There's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. I don't know if I can do it with this larger screwdriver. I'll give it a shot. Yep, okay, we got lucked out with that. You just go and unsnap these all the way around, and that lets you open this up and lets you have access to the harness inside the connector. And what they're actually, what they're saying is to, pull the wiring out, including its pin, and transfer it over to one of the others. Now there's a tool that you're supposed to have to help you push these through, and I'm not going to get into that in this video because this is about programming and changing the VIN on these VCMs, but I'm just highlighting that if you have this particular early 96 one only this early 96 one, you're supposed to have had this modification done in the field by the GM dealer, more likely while the vehicle was still under warranty, but certainly at some point, to address the problems that these 96s had that were made before February 14th that affected the transmission. So basically the VCM was giving the wrong programming information based on having the wrong sensor inputs because of these wiring issues. It wasn't correctly controlling the automatic transmission. This affected both the 4L60E and the 4L80E. Anyway, so just a side pro tip, and again, the part number I'll link in the description for this harness jumper wire kit, and you could also just make this yourself, right? I mean, all it is a jumper wire and moving a wire from one cavity connector to another. And they talk about here, there's a couple of dealer tools they use for pushing out these pins. But, you know, you can use other tools to accomplish that. So just a side comment. Let's just keep going now. So we're going to get set up to program our 96. So let me go do that. All right, we've got our VCM hooked up to our wiring harness, right? We've got, since this is the 96 one, we've got our blue connector, blue plug rather, plugged into the connector so that we can get an ignition feed out of that this particular 96, 97 type VCM has uniquely. And then we've got our white and our black wiring harness connectors, which are common to all of them. And of course, we've got our switch that we're going to use to supply the ignition feed when needed. We've got our bench power supply hooked up to our battery voltage. We've got our ground on our bench power supply hooked up for that. We've got all those grounds tied together. We've got our data link connector here that we're going to plug into our Tech2. And we've got our Tech2 connected up to this. And if we step over and take a look, come over here, we've already got our bench power supply powered up. And at this point, we're going to power on the Tech2. And I'm going to go over here and flip this ignition switch to the on position, so that when we get to the point where we need it, we have it. So now I'm just going to go in and build the vehicle. So this is a 96. So if I can tilt this up so there's less glare. It's a 96. It's a light-duty truck. We're looking at the powertrain. It's a VIN code R. It's a C, two-wheel drive vehicle with a 4-speed automatic, half-ton. And then we come down here to the ID information. And at that point, we can look at the calibration data that's in the vehicle control module, right? So we can see here that we currently have an operating system calibration, 6445. PK is a code for the OS level. We've got a 5835 engine calibration and a 7596 transmission calibration. And if we pop out and look at the VIN, we can see that we have a VIN, and you can see that there, 1GCEC14W6. TZ108477. That tells us this particular VCM came out of a vehicle that had a 4.3 liter V6 in it, that code W. And so we're going to change this VIN to the one we want with a code R. Now, the fact I picked code R before on the read doesn't matter, right? That's this particular set of things we're checking are common between the V6 and the V8. So we're just doing basic tests to let us feel that this VCM works. So if we come into data display, and engine data display, and come down here, I think I can find what I want on engine data 2. We're going to take a look and see that we can see the ignition voltage information showing up okay. It's one of the few things that I think we can check here on this 96 era VCM. There we go. All right. So it won't actually show us the voltage. We'll find out that on the 98 and up it will. But it does have this indication to tell us that ignition 1 is on. It's not low and it's not high. So it says no to those two. And if I come over here and I turn the switch off, we'll see it changes. Ignition on, nope. Low, yes. Turn it back on. Ignition on, yes. Low, no. So we're getting a response. I mean, it's at least alive. We're able to read data that's stored in Flash on the calibrations, and we're able to interactively in real time get the VCM to respond. So we can be satisfied that it's not dead and it's reasonably functional. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and proceed with the programming. Now I'm just going to back up to the beginning screen here to get ready to do that. You want to be on the start screen when you're going to do anything with SPS. I've already got my serial data connection plugged in on the side of the Tech2. And we're just going to go over to the Windows PC that we're using to run TIS2000, and we'll go ahead and take a look at programming this guy. So I'm just going to kind of switch over to this PC, move this up so you can see that screen. All right, once you get this up in view in this menu here, you're going to go into the Service Programming System. And when you go into the Service Programming System, that's the module within the TIS2000 application that we use to program something like a VCM. And I'm going to set this up as a pass-through because we're just going to be using the Tech2 as a pass-through to the vehicle control module. We're going to say replace and program ECU. So again, you know, a lot of jargon gets thrown around here. Engine control unit, older term, but still in the tool here. Whether you're doing a PCM, a VCM, an ECU, it's all the same thing here, right? And then we're going to be selecting the off-board programming adapter because what we've done with this benchtop harness simulates that setup. Then we're going to press the next key here. We're going to build the vehicle, and I just want to lower this a little bit because I think I want to have you guys be able to see the status information on the lower right as it builds up the information. So when you go pick these, I try to stay at the salvage yard. I try to stay the exact same year. It's not so important that it be the exact same brand, right? So if I can find the exact same year and the exact same part number on the module, and it's in a GMC instead of a Chevrolet, that's okay. But I do try to keep it the same wherever I can, where it's got the same type of truck. Like, so if I take it out of a Suburban or I take it out of a GMC, right? I take it out of a GMC Suburban, I try to have it be intended to go in a Chevrolet Suburban, for example. If you take it out of a Chevrolet Tahoe and you want to get it over into a Cadillac Escalade, you just try to keep it very similar because it's more than likely going to be a smoother reprogramming for you, in my opinion. All right, so they just have Silverado here for pickups. They don't show Cheyenne, they don't show Sierra. They point out old body style because, you know, these particular kind of model trucks might have ran in parallel with the newer style in 99 and 2000 and 2001 and such. So we're going to set this up like this. Notice it's not asking us for the fuel type. It doesn't really care. It doesn't really care about the engine. This is all it needs to know. And then we're going to go to the next screen. It's going to tell us to make sure we've got everything hooked up properly with the off-board programming adapter, right? We've got our bench set up that simulates all this. We've got our Tech2 and its serial connection hooked up. And we've got it hooked up to the PC using a USB to serial adapter. If we were in the vehicle, we would, you know, do an ignition off, swap the controller ignition on event, but we're not. We just want to make sure our ignition simulation switch is on our benchtop setup, and it is. And then you notice it's red at the bottom. It's trying to build up the vehicle. It's going to reach over and try to talk to the VCM using the Tech2, and you're going to get this error. M676, the ECU could be a service ECU. And I only see this on these 96s that I've tried recently. And I couldn't find anything in the GM documentation, but I found this. I found this bulletin from Standard Engine Products from fall of 2003. It's a Tech Tips bulletin for shops that are using their rebuilt General Motors modules, and when you're trying to do the relearn information. And it turns out that one of the pages in here has exactly this error message. So it was a good find. And I take a look at this, and I go up here, and I see right down here at the bottom is this exact error. So M676, the ECU could be a service ECU, and it says this is just a message. It indicates the PCM/VCM does not contain a VIN and calibration. We know that's not true, so for some reason it's not able to read it. It's usually seen on Delco PCM VCMs. Continue as usual. So basically they say to ignore it. Well, I've never ignored these kind of errors, but since these guys, you know, do this for a living, and at least at the time in the day when these were still commonly done, we're just going to tell it, all right, we're going to ignore it. And what we're going to do is we'll enter the VIN that we want to use here manually. So I'm going to pull up the target vehicle's VIN, and we're going to plug that in here. So 1 GCE K14R XTE 107689 107689 1 GCE K14 RXTE 107689. Now again, this is going into a vehicle that had one of these earlier generation VCMs that had the wiring problem. This particular vehicle was made on October 20th, 1995. The donor vehicle I think it was made, you know, in 95 as well in October. I want to say October 18th, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But they definitely were made in close proximity to each other, and they use the same flawed vehicle control module. So we're going to keep with that. So now when we enter the VIN manually, TIS is going to still proceed, even though it wasn't able to read it itself. It's going to take our manual override. It's going to come up and say, all right, well, what do you want to do? You know, vehicle control module, powertrain control module. Yes, this is the one controller that we're able to do. We're going to do a normal to program it. This reconfigure has to do with changing information in the PCM, or the VCM in this case. Tire information is what you probably find on here. Let's take a look at that first. So it's still able to reach out and communicate with the VCM, even though we had that error. So, you know, just like the bulletin said, it looks like something that you can ignore for these particular years. And then what you get here is the ability, the only thing you can do here, right, is to come in and select a tire and rear gear ratio selection. So of all the tires that were available brand new for the vehicle associated with this particular VIN number, you can pick which ones of those you have and change it, right? So there's a setting, there's a set of LT215s, 225s, and 245s. They all are 16s, although the first one's an 85R. And then if you come down here, you can see there's some P-Series tires in both 16 and 15 sizes that you can pick from. And there's a whole bunch of different things here, different types of tires. Looks like the axle ratios, though, are all fixed at 373. But that's how you would come in on one of these programmable VCMs and change the tires. This is what the dealer would have went into. They would have reconfigured it. So we're going to go back out, though, because we're in here to change the VIN and the calibration. So we're going to go proceed to the next step. And you can see, by the way, it's got Chevrolet down here because it knows on this target VIN that that's what it's going to go into, because TIS2000 has a database of all the VINs. All right, so I'm going to have to come up on this one a little bit, because what's more important is for you to see these tabs and selections at this particular juncture. So along the top, we've got a set of tabs: operating system, engine, system, electronic brake. So this would be the electronic brake control system, the speedometer, and the transmission. So you can see in 96 and 97, you should have these 6 tabs and there's all these functionalities. Since it wasn't able to read it, it claims it doesn't know what the current calibration is, right? So we were able to see these calibrations when we read them on the Tech2, but for whatever the reason is on this kind of a setup on the bench, it's not able to do that. Well, we can see we have a couple of choices here. You know, there's the 7575, and then there's this 7608. And this 7608 is tied to a particular service bulletin that says it's to correct a chuggle or surge on vehicles that have a complaint like this only. So you're not supposed to apply it unless the particular vehicle has the complaint, so it's not generally used, so we'll take the 7575. We've got a speedometer calibration, no choices. Brake calibration, no choices. So you just take the one that were offered. Here on the system, we're offered choices. So the 7862 looks like just an initial calibration for production. And then we have one associated with the bulletin for vehicles that were equipped with the telecommunications option, that there could be some interference. I suspect if you read this, you'll see it's something like either static or you know, interference with the communications equipment and the engine's frequency. And so we don't have that situation. I doubt any of those pieces of equipment are still on the road. Probably an early type of cellular system, I'm guessing. Just a guess, though. If you know, leave a comment below. Interested in knowing what type of option that was. And then under engine, you know, we're not able to take any of these because they want to kind of force people into this particular 4879. So they wanted the dealers to get everybody on this because this corrected a false trouble code and improved drivability. So they want everybody on that. So you cannot take one of the older ones in this case. GM would do that to make sure they got what they wanted in the field. Similarly, they're forcing you to take this. So we can go on to the next screen and we can see it wasn't able to read anything, but we can see what we're going to apply. We can go and take this in here, and then it's going to start the programming event. And it's going to go through the Tech2 as a pass-through. So during this whole thing, the Tech2 will just kind of be showing this graphic to let you know it's not hung and that it's actually doing something. So it just kind of repeats this kind of flashing asterisk. and then these dots and squares that fly by. Now, it's going to go through for a bit and calculate what it needs to do before you'll actually see something update on TIS2000. There it goes. And we're going to be moving 262,112 bytes, or 262K. It's giving us an estimated time here of 3.5 minutes, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Things are moving along pretty quick, so it's dropping that time pretty rapidly. It's already dropped down to 2 minutes, and we're coming up on the halfway point pretty quick. I'm sure it's going to update that number again down to 1.5 minutes, and so it's just chugging along. And again, all during this time, you can just always reference the Tech2 and see that things are happening, data's moving. Obviously, you don't have any indications on the module itself, but as long as nothing's getting hung and you don't get any errors, everything's going correctly. The kind of errors you usually get on something like this on the bench is just communications errors with the PC. If you got some problem with the USB to serial or the direct serial cable, that's usually all you run into. On the vehicle, the kind of errors you might run into, it's very important that you have a good battery system support device plugged in. I'm trying to think of the right word here, but it's escaping me. But it's not a battery charger. But when you're on the vehicle, you need one of these battery assist devices. I'll link something, rather than link, I'll run something down at the bottom of the video what I'm talking about here. They just make sure the voltage doesn't drop down too low, because these things draw a lot of current when they're being programmed. And if you got a weak battery, there's a possibility that you'll end up getting stuck and brick the thing. All right, we get to the end here now. It's all blank on what to do. It should have told us, like we saw in the service manual, about doing a crankshaft position variation relearn and possibly also a pass lock, theft system relearn. It's blank because it wasn't able to, read itself, so it doesn't know what to say here. So that's just a software glitch in TIS2000. So we can close this out and we're back to the main screen. So let's take a look at the Tech2 and kind of validate what we did and confirm it went through okay. So we're going to come back over here to the Tech2, and let's go back in here and we're going to rebuild the vehicle. Now this time, it doesn't matter whether you say VIN R or whatever down here for this particular step, because if we were looking at a special function, it probably would. In fact, it usually does. But when we're just trying to pull data, it doesn't. So to show you that, I'm actually going to pick the W this time, just to show that picking the G6 doesn't matter. And I'm going to say that we want to look at this information, and regardless of what we put in there. Whoops. Now, we should not have gotten that because I did turn our ignition switch on, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cycle it off and then back on. And there it goes. So, my bad, guys. Whenever you do one of these programming events, you got to turn the ignition off for a little bit of time. Should leave it off for like 30 seconds, but I just cycled it so that the Tech2 was able to communicate. The VCM sometimes is not going to communicate with the Tech2 after you flash it. If you don't turn the key off and back on, you go through a cycle like that. All right, so we turned that off and on. So we didn't do anything on the Tech2. It immediately was able to communicate. And we can see the calibrations that we're currently at, 6445, 5879, and 7575. And if we back out and we take a look at the VIN, we can see now we've got the VIN that we plugged in there, the 1GCEK 14RX, now TE107689. So we were able to update the VIN and update the calibrations even with that error. So I have to say that the guys at Standard Motor Products back from a decade or so ago know what they're talking about, and you just ignore that error. It doesn't mean anything. So let me get set back up now, and let's take a look at the 98. All right, we've got our 98 connected. You notice we don't need this blue connector because there is no ignition feed on that cavity for the 98. And we use the same exact white and black connectors with the same wiring we used for the 96 and 97. That's all common for the whole family. We've got our battery voltage here. We've got our ground to our benchtop power supply, and we still have our same switch for doing the ignition. So we're going to come over here now. Same thing we did last time on the 96, and we're going to take a look at the Tech2 view. It's a little bit different on the 98. Go ahead and turn our power supply on, turn our Tech2 on. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the ignition switch into the on position as well, so we don't run into that problem while we're going through this. So if I can get a view where this isn't so glary. I notice this is really glary. There we go. All right, so sorry about that. I knocked the camera there. All right, so let's go ahead and build the vehicle. So in this case, it's a 98, and this came out of a Chevrolet Suburban, and we're going to put it into a GMC Suburban. It's a VIN R. The one it came out of is a K, and we're going to put it into a C. Automatic, half-ton, no air pump. Let's take a look at the ID information. Here's our calibration information. You can see that the layout of how the data is shown is a little bit different than it was in 96. So we have our software level in this year up at the top now. And then we have our software OS calibration, engine calibration, and transmission calibration. And then if we go out of this and we go down to the VIN, there's our VIN. So our donor was a 16R7WJ 364-183. And if we go try to do some basic checks that the VCM is working okay, go in engine data display, and I think we actually find it in data 1 here for this year. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at the ignition voltage area. Here we go. So here we can see there's an actual ignition 1 volts of 11.7. And if I come over here and hit the switch, it's going to go to 0. And I switch the ignition back on, and it's going to go back up to 12 from the bench power supply. Now I believe in data 2, we'll see that same kind of ignition high-low data as well. So it's very interesting. You can see how the Tech2, even with very similar technology, each year things changed. Here we go. Actually, I should have went here in the first place because it's all combined up. So now we can have the voltage showing in the same screen as these other feedback indicators. So now if I flip that switch, I got 0 volts. I got no, yes, no. Turn it back on, I got 12 volts, I got yes, no, no. So it's definitely interacting, and we have communications to and from the scan tool and the vehicle control module. So again, it passed our cosmetic checks, it's passing our electrical checks. Let's go ahead and give it a program. So same setup, we're going to go over to the Tech2 and get it back to the start screen to prepare it for being used by SPS. You want to make sure you don't go back too far. If you go back too far on those back exit buttons, you can get the thing hung up sometimes. All right, let me see if I can get this without too much trouble over here to the screen. All right, in position. So just like with the 96, we're going to go into the service programming system. We're going to select pass-through, replace and reprogram off-board programming adapter. We're going to build the vehicle. So it's a 98 light-duty truck. In this case, it's a Suburban. In that case, it asks me what kind of fuel it takes. And I'm going to say gasoline. And actually, as before, I want to kind of lower this just a little bit so you guys can see it build up the VIN and brand information in the bottom right of TIS2000 here as we proceed. So right now it's green, good communications, but it's incomplete data. It just knows what we entered here. So now we hit next. We'll get the screens about, do you have everything wired up correctly? Yes, we do. We would go through, if we were in the vehicle, swapping out the two controllers. We're doing this on the bench, so it's kind of all simulated. Now we've got a red light while it tries to reach out and talk to the VCM. And unlike on the 96, this time we're actually able to retrieve that information as expected. So there's our VIN. There's our VIN from the V6 there. And we're going to go plug in the target information that we want to go through and do here. So this vehicle's target destination, check my little list here. It's a little bit different. This guy that we want to put this into, sorry about that, guys. Trying to find my place. There we go. I have a GMC Suburban this is going into, so it's going to be a 3G KEC 16R 6W G5 10130. Just kind of check our work here. 3G KEC 16R6 WG 510130, and it came out of a 1G NFK 16R7W J364 183. Right, so it came out of that and it's going into this. So you see down here it says Chevrolet 98, and it's got that other VIN I just rattled off there. And as soon as we go, hope you guys can read that. Maybe I can blow this up just a little bit. Nope, that's as far as she goes. Well, hopefully you can see that at the bottom. When I hit this, it's going to be red, and now it's green again, and now we have the new VIN, and it says GMC 1998. So it picked it all up in the database. We're going to do a VCM, and just like on the 96, if we wanted to, we could come in here and reconfigure the tire and gear ratio combos, as long as it was one that was available new in 98 on this Suburban, you could pick it. Leave that alone, though, because we're coming here to do a normal programming. VCI is something only used by the dealer. To do a VCI program, you have to have a number, like a code number that you get from the Technical Information System Service, like ACDelco TDS, and you're just not going to get something like that as an individual user. I don't even know if you would get something like that if you were a shop. It's a dealer thing for the most part. All right, now we can read current calibrations. You notice, unlike the 96, we don't have the brake system anymore. Only the 96 one had the electronic brake system built into the VCM. So here we've got the operating system, and it's telling us, hey, you need to take 5095. There's nothing, nothing better than what you already have there. On the engine, you have 4761, but you need to take this newer one. And now again, sometimes you'll see something like this, and it's not even in the list. And the reason for that is this calibration was a Chevrolet, and we don't have that calibration available in GMC that we're going to. So even though it's a Suburban, and it's a 98, and it's a 5.7 liter VIN code R engine in both vehicles, there can be different calibrations between the brands. And there could be other pieces of equipment that are different in terms of, if it had a different kind of transmission or something of that nature. Fuel system is the same. The system calibration, so we've got a 6223 in there now. We remember this from last time. This is the special update for a particular telecommunication interference problem. We don't want to take that. We don't have that situation. So we'll stay the same. Speedometer, here we had an 0420. Our only choice with this GMC is 8997, so we will take it. And our transmission has no updates. It's the same for both brands. And so here's just a summary. Same, updating, same, updating, and updating. Hit next. And just like with the 96, it's going to go build what it needs to do. And it's going to start talking through the Tech2, just like we saw before. Over to the VCM. In this case, we got a lot more data. The 98 has 342,114 bytes, or 342K, that we have to send down to the flash. It's already started. It's dropping its estimate pretty quick. It started off at 12 minutes. Now it's down to 7. Now it's down to 4. Chugging away. The VCM is still 25-year-old plus technology. So is the Tech2. So is TIS2000. But the PC is much more newer and modern than what they were running in the dealerships in the day. So I imagine there's an extra bump in speed that we're getting because of that, and that's why it's chugging along a lot faster than it might have done back in the day. All right, so we're down to, it claims it only needs 1 minute and 38 seconds, but I think that's still too high. We're almost up to half. I'm sure it's going to drop down to less than 1 minute here very quickly as it sees that things are chugging along very nicely. And again, anytime you might see this, if it happens to sit for a while, you can always check the Tech2, make sure the Tech2 is not hung. It sometimes does, at least in newer vehicles. It sometimes gets to a point where it sits for a while in the progress bar, and I've just learned to be patient. TIS is pretty good, whether it be TIS2000 like this or even TIS2 Web. It's pretty good about putting an error message up if there's a problem. So we're coming up in the last 30-something seconds here. Looks like we're coming up on 75% done. No errors at the programming so far. Chugging along, coming up on 80%. Everything I'm showing here with a Tech2, you could also do with an MDI tool and a subscription at ACDelco TDS.com to the Tech2 Win Simulator. Or emulator may be a better word for it. It runs on your laptop, uses the MDI as a pass-through, and communicates to VCM. The problem with that is you have to pay for a subscription over and over again for every VIN. I like the Tech2 on these 2008 and older vehicles because it's a one-time charge. You buy the tool and it's free to do what you need to do as long as you have a copy of this software that I'm showing. All right, so now that it was able to read everything in at the beginning, it comes back and says, hey, you know, you are going to need to do this crankshaft position relearn procedure. Sometimes you don't have to do this. I don't personally do this unless I get the DTC, because sometimes you don't need to do it. And they do, in fairness, say may be needed. Not will be needed, may be needed. So you don't always have to have that. All right, let's come over to Tech2 and let's check our work on this. So we're going to come over here and go back down where we were right there. And let me make sure I got the camera picking this up so it's not too whited out there. All right, let's rebuild the vehicle. Sorry about that. Bumped the camera while trying to keep the Tech2 from bouncing on the table here. 98, light duty truck, powertrain information, VIN code R all the way in this pass. Started with a K, went into a C. 4-speed manual, half-ton, no air pump. Let's go down and ID the module. Take a look at our calibrations now. 5095 on the OS, 4759 on the engine, 6106 on the trans. And our VIN is now our 3 GKE, blah, 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 right? It went from our Chevrolet to our GMC. Now, just like last time, although I forgot to do it and it actually caused an issue, it didn't this time, I'm going to turn this ignition key simulation switch in the off position because I want to make sure that that takes. So even though, like you saw here, it didn't glitch out like it did with the 96, it's just a best practice. Leave that guy off, that ignition key off. If you have it in the vehicle, leave it off for 30 seconds just to make sure that VIN takes. There's something about that every now and then I've seen, if you don't do that, you can sometimes have to redo what I just did. All right, let's take a look at the final steps in the service manual as we wrap up. All right, guys, last tour here through the service manual. So we talked about these the information they talked about here about the module that needed to be transferred, right? They go through that, about how to remove and reinstall that and reattach the cover and how to get this guy reinstalled. What I mostly want to talk about here is in the back section, and they talk about the programming piece and what you need to pay attention to. I just wanted to double down one more time on this crankshaft positions system variation relearn procedure. Learn, relearn, I call it a relearn procedure. That's going to be documented here in the service manual, what you need to do with that. Let's see if we can give it a little bit more magnification here for you guys. So this is what you need to do for that. And you need to have the scan tool, of course. And then similarly, here's how you do the password learn procedure. We obviously don't need to do this on the bench. If you have a Tech2, this one is documented on how you use the Tech2, but there's also a way to do this particular one without a Tech2 scan tool. And they go over those steps here and here. So I just thought I would put that in here for you guys that have to do that. So I hope you found this useful. I hope this helped you out, whether you've got a 96 or a 97 on that first generation, or a 98 up all the way through the old body style series into 2000, 2001 with the 3/4 ton, 1 ton trucks that continued on with these same Vortec vehicle control modules. If you found it all good, give us a thumbs up. If you found this kind of content might be useful, please consider subscribing. Otherwise, thanks for watching.